Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Tonya, and today we're going to be chatting about Throne of Glass. Now, Throne of Glass is a series that most fantasy readers or romantasy readers have heard of, but there still are quite, even though it's super popular, tons of people have read it, there are still people who have not read it because it can be a little bit intimidating of a series to read, just because it is a pretty big series. So I thought it'd be fun today to just chit chat about what the best way to read this guy is, in my opinion. Of course, my opinion is not the only opinion out there, but I do feel pretty strongly about what the best way to read the series is to get the most out of it that you can. I love this series. It is definitely my favorite Sarah J. Maas series, and it's one of my top 2 series that I've ever read, and I have read a whole lot of fantasy books. But this one's definitely right up there at the top of my list, and I know it's one that I'm going to continue to read over and over again. Just basically a little background on Throne of Glass, if you're not familiar with the series, is we're following an 18-year-old assassin named Celaena Sardothien. The series picks up with her being enslaved in a salt mine. She was sentenced to serve time here for a crime she has committed. The salt mine is horrible. It's not a humane place. They are terrible to anyone who is enslaved there. A lot of people aren't there because they committed any sort of crime. They've just been basically enslaved into service to work in these mines by the current king. But Celaena was sent there for a crime, unjustly in my opinion, but she has been there for over a year, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, the crown prince comes, has her dragged out of the salt mines because he has decided that she is going to be his champion for this competition that his father is holding. The competition is going to be basically against a bunch of other assassins or thieves or mercenaries that were selected by other high members of the court. And whoever wins this competition is going to become the king's royal assassin, because doesn't every evil king need a good assassin? Yes, they do. But that's just a low-key synopsis on how the Throne of Glass series starts out. Now, it does grow quite a bit from there, and the plot definitely evolves from this competition. That's not the main focus of the whole series. That's just what you really see going on in this first book. It becomes a true epic fantasy where, you know, evil is spreading across the whole world, and monumental, inhumane things are happening to people across all of the realms, and they just really need someone to come and save them and get rid of this evil king. So now that I've given you that little bit of a background, we're going to talk about the reading order for the Throne of Glass series, and that should be really straightforward, but you'll find that there's a lot of suggestions on ways that you can read the series to really get the most out of it. It is a longer series, and some people can find it kind of intimidating. No reason to be intimidated by it. I'm going to give you what I think is the best way to read the series, but you could, of course, read it in whatever fashion that you would like. So, here we go. So, Throne of Glass is the first book in the series, and you may think easy peasy. That's the one I'm going to start with. And that is what a lot of people suggest, is just first book, start with this one. That's what the author intended, and kind of just move on from there. Now, in my opinion, the best book to start with is Assassin's Blade. Now, this book actually came out in 2014, and the first book, Throne of Glass, came out in 2012. So there was already 3 or 4 other books in the series out before Assassin's Blade was published. Now, this book is a collection of novellas that talk about Celaena's life pre-Throne of Glass. So it gives us a great backstory and insight into why Celaena is the way that she is. Now, this isn't a complete backstory, but it definitely gives you some insights into some of the things that she's gone through and how those things have shaped her and led up to her imprisonment. By the time I finished reading this book, I already loved Celaena, and I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I kind of feel like if I would have read this book first, it would have taken me a lot longer to connect with Selena than it did, since I already had her story in here. We kind of get a good understanding through this book that the face Selena presents to the world is a persona. It's not who she really is. She comes off as someone who's very full of themselves, which she is a little bit full of herself, but not the way that she portrays herself. And she has some snark to her, which I personally love some snarkiness, but I know it can be off-putting for some people. So that's why I think if you read this one first, you're really not going to have a good understanding of where Selena's coming from and why she kind of portrays herself in the way that she does. So my suggestion, Assassin's Blade first, follow that up with Throne of Glass, and then after that, it kind of goes in chronological order in my opinion. So next comes Crown of Midnight, and then Heir of Fire. And after this book is where a lot of people suggest you read Assassin's Blade, because they say this is where the author intended for you to read it because that's how they were published. But like I said, I don't follow that philosophy. I think that, you know, getting that backstory at the beginning, since it's already a completed series, is super important. So for me, it doesn't belong in its chronological order. It belongs at the beginning. So after you read Heir of Fire, then you'd move on to Queen of Shadows. And then this is where the next kind of controversial reading order thing comes into play. Now, the next two books, Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, take place at the exact same time. They're just following different characters. At this point, the world has gotten pretty complex. There's a whole lot of different stories and people that we're following. And to kind of get all the pieces in place for the final book, these stories had to take place in two separate books. Some people say you should read these two books at the same time because they took place at the same time. And some people, after reading this one, don't want to be away from the characters that are in this book for the amount of time it takes them to read this book, so they read them together. I think that's kind of a disservice to the books themselves. They both are such great stories that they need their individual attention. So I would read these two separately. So Empire of Storms, this is the one that's following Selena, Dorian, and some of the other characters in it. Tower of Dawn, we're getting more of Cale's character development and his story. And it's kind of his time to shine in the book. Cale's been in the series from the first book, Throne of Glass, where he started off as the straight-laced captain of the guard. He started to kind of fall for Selena. They had a budding romance, but that ended up not really working out due to very tragic circumstances. And they've kind of taken different paths and blamed each other for a lot of things and gone their separate ways. And this book is the one where we really get to see who Cale becomes and see how he's changed. And it's like I said, it's really important to the plot of the final book that we get that story in this book. So give it the attention it deserves. Do not try to read the books together. Reading them together would just be a lot anyway. There's tons of people in these books. The world's very expansive. I can't imagine trying to keep up with two books with all the different people that are in them. And I just think that the story's going to become muddled and all of the characters and all the plot lines aren't going to get the attention they deserve. So read them separately, in my opinion. If you do want to read them together, there's tons of guides out there that can kind of give you ideas of the best way to read them tandemly. But in my opinion, separation is best on this one. And then, of course, we have the behemoth of a final book. It's a very long one. I think it's like 1,000 pages or some such. It's really long. Let's see. It is 984 pages, so almost a 1,000-page book. Could it have broken up into 2 books? Probably, but it was nice to get the ending all tied up in one book. A lot of things still take place in this book. That's why it's so long. I mean, it truly is an epic fantasy. The world building and character development is absolutely amazing. Definitely my favorite series by Sarah J. Maas. And even though it is a little more complex and a little more of a time commitment to read it, it's not something that you're going to regret doing. So highly suggest tackling the series if you haven't already. Now, if you like audiobooks, the audiobooks for this series are also great. Now, I don't suggest listening to the audiobooks at work. I ended up listening to them after I had read the book series, and even though I knew what was going to happen, I ended up crying at my desk at work. They are pretty emotionally taxing books as you start to get through them. You get to know the characters in such a way that, I mean, you just feel it all. And yeah, I cried at work and I was not too happy about that. So that's something to be aware of if you do listen to the audiobooks. There are times that are going to come up in those audiobooks where you may shed a tear or two, and you may not want to do that at work. I am not generally so good at sharing my emotions in public, so I would prefer not to cry at work. But definitely something to keep in mind with the audiobooks. They're great. Highly suggest listening to them, but be aware of your surroundings. So I hope you enjoyed my little take on what the best way to read the Throne of Glass series is. If you haven't read the series, I hope it inspired you to go ahead and give it a go. You will not regret it. As I said, it's one of my top series of all time, and I know that I'm going to continue to reread it for years to come, just because I loved it that much. But if you have read the series, leave a comment down below about what you think is the best order to read the books in, or who your favorite character or your favorite book was. So that's going to be it for today's video. Take care, keep reading, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye!